I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the life of a carnivorous plant. There are variations on this theme, but one thing they all have in common is that they live a life of danger and hardship in a place where most other plants would struggle or die. Basically, carnivorous plants are hardcore survivalists, taking on tough situations where literal pansies are too weak to survive. It's reasonable to wonder why most people wind up killing their carnivorous plants, and this video is intended to help you not only not kill your plants, but maybe also get some babies out of them. I can't promise you over 100 babies like I've got, but you can easily do that if you want, since I propagated mine accidentally. If I can do what I've done with that while having a whoops moment, there's no reason to suppose you can't do better on purpose. The actual instructions for making baby carnivorous plants or propagating carnivorous plants will be included in their own video, because plant propagation is both complicated and weird compared to animal propagation. This video would be way too long if I tried to cover everything in one go, so consider this an introduction and basic care instructions. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in growing carnivorous plants or plants in general, because there's more of this coming. There is going to be some variation in the sort of soil you might use for carnivorous plants, but all of the ones I'll be talking about in this video like the same soil conditions. So if you have one of these, you're all set. And if you don't, you should maybe find out more about your specific plant before you take my advice. Specifically, I'll be talking about Venus flytraps, Cape sundews, another sundew that's probably native to South Africa, but since I didn't actually buy it, I never got to know its name, and North American pitcher plants. If you have any of these, then you can use this soil mix I'm about to tell you about. All of these plants require very wet, acidic soil that is nutrient poor. They may survive in slightly more nutrient-rich soil as long as the pH and moisture levels are right, but you may see changes in their leaf shape because they won't need to make traps anymore. They're getting their nutrients somewhere else. I like to use a 2 to 1 to 1 mix of sphagnum peat moss, sand, and perlite. But you can change things up if you like. You could do 50-50 sphagnum peat moss with sand if you want a heavier mix, or you could do 50-50 sphagnum peat moss with perlite if you want a lighter mix. And I mean lighter like the whole pot will weigh less. The sphagnum peat moss is there to do two things. It keeps your pH acidic and it holds lots of water. It's really, really important that you only buy peat moss with sphagnum in its name for your carnivorous plants. The sand or perlite or both is there to provide little pockets of air so the roots don't have to struggle so hard to breathe. Plant roots breathe. You can totally raise a carnivorous plant in 100% sphagnum peat moss if you like, but I have seen them do a lot better if I include the other stuff, so it's worth the extra effort and expense to do a soil mix. You're going to want to mix your soil an hour or two, or even a day before repotting, because the sphagnum peat moss can take a while to hydrate fully. Once it's wet, it'll suck up water like a sponge, but if you're starting from dry, it takes a little work. As your mix hydrates, you may need to add more water periodically to keep your available moisture up. You want a very wet mix for these plants. This is important. Only use distilled water when mixing up your soil. Do not use tap water. Do not use bottled water unless it's bottled distilled water. So make sure it says distilled on the container, or you distill it yourself, or it's rainwater. Unless you get your carnivorous plant from a trusted source that knows what they're doing, I recommend that you always repot your plant when you get it home. It doesn't have to happen instantly, but within a week would be best. This is because when a grower knows that their carnivorous plant is going to go off into the world, they tend to use a soil mix that is not optimal, but it will protect the plants from being mishandled a little better. So maybe something that holds water better than it needs to, but doesn't breathe as well, or, whatever. While your carnivorous plant was in the care of, say, a grocery store, it may have been watered with tap water, or it may even have been given fertilizer by a well-meaning employee who didn't know better. Repotting your plant as quickly as you can will help get it away from the salts and pH swings from tap water and fertilizer before they can damage or kill it. If you get your carnivorous plant from me, repotting will be much less urgent. I tend to follow my own advice when caring for them, and when I gift them or sell them, I like them to be in a pot that's sufficient for their needs for a while. Carnivorous plants will probably survive in your care without being fed at all, but what's the fun of that? If you're inclined, you can feed a Venus flytrap once every 1 or 2 weeks. So that's one bug in one trap every 1 or 2 weeks. It's best if you feed it a live insect that can easily fit in its trap. This is because the plant may reject the food if it doesn't detect motion after the trap has closed as a safety function to keep from wasting its energy trying to digest a pebble or whatever. During the winter, it will be more difficult to get small insects for your plant, but you need not worry because they can go a very long time between meals without being harmed. Venus flytraps may also go a little bit dormant in the winter, meaning that their growth will slow down or stop completely. Some of their traps might die back, and they'll naturally need food less often. You can feed a sundew by sticking a small insect to its leaf, because they're covered all over with basically glue. I've found that sundews are especially effective at feeding themselves because they can catch smaller prey than a Venus flytrap. So it's even less important to feed them. I usually see fungus gnats on my carnivorous plant from my carnivorous plant soil get stuck to the sundew leaves. Some sundews, like the Cape sundew, will curl their leaves around their prey to help digest it, and that's really, really fun to watch. So I understand if you want to feed it. Most sundews do not need a dormant period and will just keep chugging along all winter long as they're warm enough and they have enough light. During the warmer months, you can feed a pitcher plant by dropping insects, fish food, or small fertilizer pellets down their traps every few weeks. They won't need to be fed during the colder months. If the pitchers are dry inside, you can squirt some distilled water in there. You are the rain. Help them out. Pitcher plants will go dormant in the colder months, and their traps may even die completely back during this time. They won't need food during their dormancy. Do not get worried. They will come back up in the spring, even bigger and more beautiful than the year before, assuming they got good care. Providing sufficient food will result in faster, more vigorous growth, but in every case, it's absolutely essential to avoid overfeeding your carnivorous plant. They don't use their food for energy like we do. Like most other plants, they get their energy from sunlight. The food is an alternative fertilizer source. Um, and just like you can burn a regular plant by giving it too much fertilizer, you can burn a carnivorous plant by giving it too many insects. Plants develop carnivory when they grow for long periods in environments that make it hard to get nutrients, like swamps. So they can be particularly sensitive to situations in which there are too many nutrients. Carnivorous plants should be watered only with distilled water or with rainwater, which is just nature's distilled water. Keep your pot in a small dish that is at least an inch or two deep, and simply fill the dish with an inch of water whenever you notice that you can't see any water in it anymore. Blah, 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 blah. Any water in it anymore. The dish you use is up to you, but I do not recommend terracotta dishes because the water will seep through the terracotta and onto whatever piece of furniture or windowsill your carnivorous plant lives on, and it makes a mess. It's nasty. Don't do it. Plastic, glass, or glazed ceramic dishes are all waterproof and will work best. And yes, if you don't have the means to go out and buy a special dish for your carnivorous plant, it is completely okay to reuse a yogurt cup or cut off the bottom of a soda bottle and use that for your plastic dish. The plant will not care, just as long as you keep its feet wet, and by feet I mean roots. Tap water and even bottled water can contain salts that will directly harm your carnivorous plant or gradually build up in the soil and slowly poison it, um, or change the pH. You should not stop drinking that water because those salts are important and necessary for humans. They're just not good for carnivorous plants. Watering your carnivorous plant with distilled water may sound kind of like a pain in the buns, but if you have just one or two carnivorous plants, You won't need that much distilled water. I found that a tray of 32 carnivorous plants uses about a half a gallon of distilled water a week. If you're only watering one or two carnivorous plants in 3-inch pots, you may only need to buy a gallon of distilled water a month for them. The reason there isn't a bigger difference in the amount of distilled water used is that my 32 plant tray completely covers the water. So I probably lose less of it to evaporation than you'll lose with a single pot in a dish. As I said earlier, carnivorous plants get their energy from sunlight, just like the regular plants in your garden. I know we picture swamps and bogs as shady, spooky places with lots of dark nooks and crannies with mysterious eyes peering out of the shadows. But the swamps and bogs in which carnivorous plants grow are bright, sunny places with lots of direct sunlight. During the warmer months, your carnivorous plants will be perfectly fine hanging outside in the sunlight. Here in Utah, the only problem with that is that it's hot and dry, and you would probably need to water your outdoor carnivorous plant a few times a day to keep it wet enough. If you keep them indoors, they should ideally be in a south-facing window. If you can't provide a south-facing window, you may be able to get away with a differently oriented window plus a supplemental light. My carnivorous plants have always had access to a south-facing window. But in my new home, the light to that window is blocked by a giant pine tree. I deal with that issue by providing a bunch of additional light from big shop lights hanging over my plant shelf. You can probably get away with not being quite as extreme as I am. As long as you don't provide more light than direct summer sunlight, you don't need to worry about overlighting your carnivorous plants. If you see them growing pale and spindly, that may be a sign that it's time to look into ways to increase the amount of light that they're getting. As long as you follow these directions for soil mix, water, feeding, and lighting your carnivorous plant, it should survive for years in your care. All of these are perennial plants, which means they will continue growing year after year. This is my third year with these plants, so I can say for certain that they can last at least 3 years for you with proper care. According to my research, and by research I mean I just looked it up, Venus flytraps can live up to 20 years. Some sundew species can survive for 50 years, and some pitcher plants can also survive for 50 years. So if you buy a carnivorous plant from a grocery store or a county fair or something and it dies, even though you followed my directions, don't despair. It probably got mishandled somewhere along the way by someone who didn't know better, and you just didn't get to it in time to save it. If your new carnivorous plant survives for at least a month after you buy it and you follow all my directions, it should be with you for a very long time. As we wrap up this video, it's probably also a good idea to talk about plant poaching. There are people who collect carnivorous plants from the wild to sell, and this is becoming a big problem. There are even some carnivorous plants that are endangered because of illegal collecting. So I just want to assure you that I bought all of my plants from a reputable carnivorous plant nursery that propagates their own plants. And if you can, I would really recommend you to try to get your plants from a reputable source as well. This video isn't sponsored by them, but I've been very happy with buying from predatory plants at predatoryplants.com. They're physically located in Half Moon Bay, California, and they have a really fun selection of plants that they bred themselves that you can buy. If you get a plant from them that I didn't talk about in this video, make sure you take the time to learn about that specific plant. Their website has tons of tutorials about caring for the plants they sell. I was also very pleased with how well they packaged their plants for shipping. Can you hear that motorcycle? Sorry about that. Shipping online orders. They were beautiful and healthy right out of the box. You should also know that you may find directions for caring for carnivorous plants that are different from mine. That won't automatically mean that I'm right and they're wrong, or that they're right and I'm wrong. It just means that there are often multiple ways to do things, and that's especially true with living creatures and nature. I can't promise that whatever source disagrees with me is also right, because there are a lot of sources out there, but they're not wrong just because they just disagree with me. If they're a reputable source and you like their way better, do it their way. It's important that you care for your plants in a way that works for your schedule and the resources that you have. If you are excited about growing carnivorous plants, be sure to subscribe to my channel because there's definitely for sure going to be a video about making baby carnivorous plants. Word on the street is that making babies is a lot of fun. So if you have a carnivorous plant, you should definitely give it a try. Also remember that liking my video, disliking my video, and commenting on my video are all ways that you can trick the algorithm into thinking that this is quality content that it should recommend to more people. Then my channel can grow and I might make a little money from it, which in turn would buy me more time to make videos. I have no expectation of success in that regard, but it would be fun to be wrong.